Hi, how you doing? And welcome back to another video on the channel. What I've got for you today is a wildcard video going into Game Week 32. And as you can tell by the title, not only is it 93% rated, but it also only costs 98.2 million as well. So hopefully anyone watching can still afford this team. I think the key aspect behind this particular wildcard is that it relies on needing a free hit to get you through Game Week 34. If you want to see a wildcard team that you can use without a free hit, go check out my previous wildcard video, link will be in the description. I'd recommend the same team this week as I did do last week. I'm also recording this before Sunday's games have kicked off, so any injuries, I'll put replacements in the comments. And if you're new and you like the video and it does help you out, whether you're wildcarding or just looking for transfer advice, please do subscribe. It really is appreciated. So onto the team, and I think if you're wildcarding at this stage, you've got to capitalise on the doubles in 32 and 33. But I think it's also important to remember that just because a team has a double doesn't mean you should triple up at the expense of good single game week players who also might have better fixtures long term than the players who have a double now. So with that in mind, I am still sticking with Raya in goal. Everton only scored this week because of a penalty, and if that hadn't happened, you'd have a load more confidence of a clean sheet coming up. With Brentford next, then Ipswich and Palace in the double, surely you'd think they'd get at least 2 clean sheets out of those fixtures. And as for the backup keeper, I think if you've used your bench boost, it doesn't really matter. Just go for a 3.9 million keeper from a team you're not going to want 3 players from. But if you still do need to bench boost, I like Verbruggen from Brighton or Sells from Nottingham Forest. Both have good fixtures till the end of the season. So in defence, I'm sticking with Munoz. Even with Guehi suspended from the Man City game, were they ever going to keep a clean sheet against Man City away anyway? I actually don't think Palace are good long-term picks. If they didn't have 4 games in 2 weeks, I think their fixtures would look horrendous. But they do have those 2 doubles, and Munoz is just too attacking to ignore. But I would definitely have an exit plan in place though for when those doubles are over. It might look a little odd having Branthwaite in my team, but you have to remember that this wildcard has to last you till the end of the season, not just the next 2 weeks. Everton play Ipswich and Southampton both at home in the final 4 game weeks. He can sit on your bench till then, and then to save you a transfer later. You can't play all 15 of your players anyway, apart from that 1 week when you're going to bench boost. So someone's going to have to go on your bench regardless. Liverpool are one of those teams who have great single game week fixtures. West Ham and Leicester in the next 2, and if Bradley ends up being fit, I'd go with him. But Konate is the next best cheap player for them, and he's also going to play. Gvardiol is a bit like Munoz. You never really expect Man City to keep a clean sheet, but the fact that they have a double means that you just have to put him in. Everton and Villa aren't the worst fixtures either in that double, especially given how poor Villa have been in and around Champions League games. I actually don't have any Villa players in this squad. I think it's difficult to tell who'll play, apart from maybe Rodgers. And the double in 33 of Newcastle and Man City is just not worth the headache when, as we say, Liverpool play Leicester in that same week. The final defender in this team is Livramento. The fact that Newcastle have both their double games at home is a big factor here. Even though they've only kept 1 clean sheet in the last 8 and Livramento actually hasn't got an attacking return all season, he's probably their best defensive FPL option. If you don't mind the Dan Burn yellow card risk, you could definitely go for him instead, but I think he's 1 or 2 yellow cards away from a suspension, so if he picks those up in the near future, he's also maybe going to miss 1 of the double game week fixtures. So if you're feeling like it doesn't matter to you, go with Dan Burn, but if you don't want that potential risk halfway through a double game week, I would go with Livramento. So the main talking point in midfield is obviously Martinelli instead of Saka. I think it's clear that Saka is being eased back in after his long injury layoff, and he'll likely start the Champions League games and be rested in the league. So given that Arsenal are pretty much going to finish second place regardless, I don't really see, why they would force him into those league games when the Champions League is still something that could be obtainable for them. You could argue the same about Martinelli, but I would argue that he's 4 million cheaper than Saka, and therefore it's much better to have a 6.5 million player who's going to come off the bench for Arsenal than a 10.5 million player who's going to come off the bench for Arsenal, and you could potentially reinvest that money elsewhere. I think if you have the budget with nothing else to do, then go for Saka, but don't be surprised if he's benched 2 out of the next 3 league games. Salah stays in the squad. I know people say he's not on great form right now, but Liverpool do have West Ham, Leicester and Spurs in the next 3, and you probably have a lot of value tied up in him. which would make it tricky to bring him back in, and he's still owned by 72% of FPL managers, so he's a lot more popular than it might come across recently from what you hear from people talking about whether to sell Salah or not. He's still heavily relied on by a lot of FPL managers. It's also not like this team requires you to spend a lot of money elsewhere, so I think you can absolutely afford Salah and it not be a problem. I think if you sold him at this stage, you're going to want him for Leicester anyway. And then what if he goes and scores 2 goals or gets a hat-trick and you want to buy him back in and you're actually having to, find an extra $500,000 from somewhere that you wouldn't have needed to if you just kept him anyway. I don't see the need to be, too clever with this. I think it is obvious just to keep him, and I wouldn't try and reinvent the wheel by selling him and trying to find somebody else. So I do have Eze over Sarr for the Palace options. It, of course, looks a lot easier after his 2 assists this game week and a blank from Sarr, but I do think Eze offers a more steady stream of points and he's looking super confident at the moment. He also seems to be on most set pieces for Palace, even though they've got that tricky double game week coming up initially. I think he's just someone that, if you're on a wild card, I don't see why you wouldn't get him in, at least for those 4 fixtures. Jacob Murphy is maybe the best value player in FPL right now. He started every game since game week 13, so minutes aren't a problem, and we know that Newcastle have a good double, and he has 4 returns in his last 7 games as well. I think he's a great pickup. Speaking of good value, I do like Savinho as your third City option after Gvardiol and Marmoush. He already has 11 assists this season, and he started the last 7 league games for Man City, so he's bordering on as being rotation proof as is humanly possible for a team like Man City. So up front we've got no real surprises in Marmoush, Isak and Mateta. These 3 are essentially the template strikers right now, and there's no point overthinking it. All 3 could potentially get taken off early in games, but combined they have 17 attacking returns in the last 7 game weeks, and between them they've got 10 fixtures in the next 2 weeks, so I would just get them in and hope for the best. Isak and Marmoush are actually captaincy options as well during that time. So as we said at the start, shout out to Fantasy Football Hub, this team is actually rated 93%, which I think is really good for this time of year. With the amount of blanks and doubles that are coming around, this data doesn't necessarily take into account that you've got a free hit coming up. It maybe sees a lot of these players blanking in a couple of game weeks, and therefore it decreases the value. So I think if you've got a set strategy that's going to carry you through, I would, use the data to an extent, but then you also know things that maybe the data doesn't and that you can take into account when planning your team. Another major factor is that it's only 98.4 million, and that's even with buying all these players from scratch. Like we say, if you own Salah, if you own Isak, maybe Mateta, Marmoush for a while, you don't have to buy them in your team, in which case you're saving even more money that you could spend elsewhere, and this team is even cheaper for you to get. So when I look at it, the strengths are, of course, anyone can afford it. It's super important to try and, keep engaged with FPL at this stage of the season. The point spread is so close between FPL managers. Even if you feel like you're completely out of it, I can assure you you're not, and you can make a lot of gains in a short space of time, especially if you've got some chips left. Treat it as a little mini season now and set the challenge to see how far you can get. There's also 14 doubles in the next 2 game weeks between these players, which is a load, and it absolutely attacks the double game weeks coming up. The downside is that it does require a free hit. If you're planning on using your free hit in game week 34 anyway, then of course it doesn't really matter, but it does reduce you with that flexibility moving forward if you did want to use it at another time of the season. But we are running out of game weeks, so you do have to use it at some point in the next 7-8 game weeks regardless. So if it fits into a plan, I think that's the best case strategy for it. It does also create some benching headaches. Whenever you wildcard, you do tend to have, quite a strong bench, unless you're specifically trying to reduce the players on your bench. Like we say, you could upgrade the keeper here and the bench to like a Verbruggen or a Sells, and then I think if you still had your bench boost, this team's pretty much as good as it's going to get. I think you could bench boost on any given game week. Other than that, you could just shrink your bench down a little bit if you've already played your bench boost, but there's not really many players that you could get. cheaper than someone like a Branthwaite, who's still going to contribute. And like I say, after the Crystal Palace 4 games, I wouldn't have a problem taking those players out of my team anyway. So you could reduce those to some really cheap players. You could sell Munoz to a 4 million non-playing defender and have him as your third bench option, and then save about $1 million to invest elsewhere as well. So that's the team. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you're wildcarding or if you've got any questions. Maybe there's someone in this team that I've put in that you think is shocking, or maybe there's someone that I've missed out, that you think I should put in. Let me know in the comments. Always good to hear, different points of view. Go check out my other wildcard video as well. Link will be in the description. Please do subscribe if you've made it this far in the video. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you're having a good game week, and I will see you in the next one.